Welcome back to Web 110, HTML and CSS. So in the last video, I introduced the general CSS style rule basics and also the property of color and background color. And those are going to be the only properties that we are going to use in this video, but we're going to actually explore working with the whole cascade of the cascading style sheet and actually put it all into practice. So what we're going to do, I've got this week 13 folder, and you don't have to do things the same way as me, but this is what I like to do for the notes. And I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this color. And so all of the files that we're going to work on for this example, we're going to just put into this folder that is called color. So I want us to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to do new text file. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and then we're going to want to choose week 3 or wherever you have it, and then I'm going to choose the color folder. And then this is going to be our HTML file, and I'm also going to call this color. And then I'm going to choose the format of HTML, choose save, and then this has switched over to HTML, and then I'm going to create another file, do file, save as, and this is going to be our style sheet. I'm going to again find that same folder, and this I'm going to call styles, and then I'm going to choose CSS, so styles.css, hit save, and so now those should both be located in the same color folder. And in the previous video I talked about how to link to files that are in the same folder or they're in different folders, whether it's needing to go back into a folder that's shared or into a subfolder or kind of out of a folder and then into a different one. We're going to keep things really simple where I'm just going to keep everything in the same folder. There's not that many files, so it really doesn't matter to have a whole bunch of information. Now we want to start with our basic template. If you want to copy your template over, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write things from scratch again. So there's some practice working with that. And let me zoom in a little bit. I'll try to keep things zoomed in as much as possible until it gets kind of hard to see. So first we need to say which version of HTML we're using. And then we want to put in a comment with our name and then the date. So for me, this is going to be my date. And then we're putting in our HTML tag where we are specifying the language is English. And then we have our head section. So the head section has to have our title. So we could just call this, let me think what I want to do. We can do the CSS test page. Then we're going to have our meta character set, UTF-8. And then we are going to add in a section to add styles. So this is going to be where our styles would go. Let's put a note. These are our internal styles, so everything lower than that. And then to link to our external style sheet, we are going to need to have a link tag. So I'm going to say link, and then I'm going to reference what I want to link, and I'm going to say I want to link the styles. Now if it was in a subfolder called CSS, we'd have to say CSS first, but since it's in the same folder, I'll just say styles.css, so whatever it would be called. And then we also want to add in what the type of file is. So the relationship that we have is going to be a style sheet. All right, so that is going to link to our external style. So we can also add a comment here and just say this links to our external styles. So that's going to be our external styles. So if we think of that cascade, we have browser, we We've got external styles, internal styles, and then eventually we'll have inline styles. So anything that is written in this style tag section, that is going to need to be written with the CSS syntax, which is going to look a little bit different. And then under body, we are going to just add a little bit of content. So I'm going to have an H1 and I'll say this is my heading text. I'll have an H2 that will say this is my subheading text. Then I'll do a paragraph. This is my first paragraph text. And then I'm going to actually copy this paragraph just to make this go a little bit quicker. So we have 3 of them, and then I'll just switch the text. So it says second paragraph text, and then third paragraph text. So this is going to be all of the content that we're going to have that is going to be our HTML, and then everything else is going to be focusing on styles. Before we actually take a look at our styles and how to work with our style sheet, I want to open this up. So I'm going to right click on this, do open with Firefox. And then we can kind of take a look at it as we develop it. So our first part of our cascade is the browser default. So we've already looked at the browser default as far as kind of looking a little bit at the text of it. But you'll notice that we have by default the background, because we've introduced the color property and the background color property. So as you can see, the default for the background color is white, and then the default for all of the headings in the paragraph is just to have black text. And there's some other defaults going on here, like the amount of spacing and what kind of font that we're looking at, the size of the font. But the biggest thing we're looking at today is just going to be working with color. So we've got the black and white as our defaults. So now what I want to do next is we're going to go to our styles, and you need to start off with a comment. So to do a comment, you do /*, and then same thing, you want to put your name and the date. So we got, you don't have to worry about any hyphens or anything. And then to terminate your comment, you do /*. So this is actually going to look really similar if you are used to other programming languages. This is actually going to look the most familiar, versus working with HTML is a kind of unique look. All right, so we don't have to worry about adding in declaration or anything like that. We can just jump straight into working with our CSS rules. And so we are going to add a couple, and I want to add these in a way that we can see how these styles are actually overriding each other and working with that broad to specific idea. So if we focus on the selector of body, it's going to be all of the text that is inside of the body, which, if you remember, body is everything visible on the page. So absolutely everything is going to be text that's in the body. So we can start with that first. And I'm going to say, I want the body background color to be white. Sorry, I had my asterisks and my / in the wrong order. I don't know how I didn't notice that before or pay attention, but they should basically look like kind of mirrored pieces. So it should be / asterisk and then asterisk / and that's one of the nice things about the color coding, is it'll let you know when something goes wrong. And I'm not sure how I managed to type that in the wrong order. I guess it's really easy to do typos. So anyways, depending on your color scheme, you should notice that you will have a color for your selector, and then your curly brackets will show up a certain color, your properties will show up a certain color. Then these pieces where you have the colon and the semicolon to kind of split up the property from the value and then terminate your statements, those will all be color coded. The value is a different color. So that's going to help a lot with being able to recognize your statements. Now, if you just have a single statement as part of your rule and you don't really have anything else to say, you can kind of leave this on the same line. But if you have more things that you want to add, you want to return your curly bracket, and this is kind of a good way to line things up. It's going to be really easy. You want to keep track of these curly brackets so that way they stay paired with each other and you don't accidentally add one too many or one too few. And by having them line up like this, where this is lining up with body, then it's easier to see that you have all of them. So what I want to do with this is I want us to practice writing out every single way that we can write out white. So we have just the word white, and then for the hexadecimal value we have FF, FF, FF. And then we also have lowercase f, f, f. I'm going to just choose one of these, kind of combine it. So you can do lowercase, and then if it duplicates those pairs, you can do just a single one for each one. And then background color RGB. Now this will be all of the red, all of the green, all of the blue on a scale of 0 to 255. So that'll be 256 different values. And the parenthesis, semicolon. Make sure there's no spaces. And we have background color HSL. So the first color is the hue. Now when you're working with white, any hue can work. So you could say 200, you could say 0, you could say 10, whatever it's going to be. I'm just going to go with 0. And then you're going to say how much saturation. That's the amount of color. So does it have all of the color? Is it grayscale? That also isn't going to matter. You could say 100%. This is the matter. This is the number that's going to matter. So you could say I want 0%. And this is what's nice about Visual Studio Code is it previews it for you. So it's saying, oh, well, if you say that you want 0%, that's going to actually look black. So then you know, okay, well then if I put 100%, it's going to be white. So that's going to be all the different ways that we can write this. Now the way that styles work is you want to go from the most broad styles to the most specific. So it's similar to the Cascade. And this is kind of like a recipe where if you say do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, that's going to be how code is actually applied. It goes in order. So as this gets executed, it's going to say, first, I'm going to change the background color of body to white. Then I'm going to change the background color of body to white. Then I'm going to change the background color of body to white. Then I'm going to change the background color of body to white. Then I'm going to change the background color of body to white. So it's going to do all of those. I'm just writing these all out so that way you have a way of being able to view it. But if you had different colors for these, it's going to show you the lowest one as being the one that actually shows up. But it will execute through all of those. It'll just go fast enough that you're not going to necessarily be able to detect it. So that's going to be our background color. And then I want us to do an H1. And we're going to say, I want the H1 color. So that's going to be the text color. I want it to be red. And then we're just going to do the same thing, cycle through all the different ones. If you think that you have the gist of this, you could kind of go ahead on this on your own. Or if you just kind of want to follow along, either one's going to be fine. So this one, I'm not going to go through every way of writing the hexadecimal, but we want F for the red value and then no green, no blue. So it's just going to be F00 or FF0000. Then RGB, we want all of the red, none of the green, none of the blue. And HSL, the hue is 0 for red. And then we want 100% saturation to match the other ones. And then we want 50% lightness or brightness in order to get that medium red color. So that's going to be our red. And then I'm going to say I want our paragraphs to have a color of blue. We'll do the same thing. Color. This one you could probably guess. So if it goes red, green, blue, it'll be red, green, blue. RGB, red, green, blue. Now, the hues and everything you would probably have to look up on a chart. If I remember right, I want to say it's 200, maybe it's 240. We'll have to come back and take a look. Let's do 100%, 50%. Let's see what, yeah, that's wrong. I think it's let's try 240. Yep, 240. Okay. You'll start memorizing them after a little while. All right, so I'm gonna save this, refresh, and now we have the H1 is red, the paragraphs are blue, and then we have the H2 is black because we haven't specified it. So because it hasn't been specified in the external style sheet, the browser default is being applied. So that's where anything that we're writing in this external style sheet will overwrite those browser defaults. And that's going to be the hierarchy of how everything is going to work. So this is going to be everything that we are going to do in the external style sheet. The next step is going to be adding styles to our head section and adding them internally instead. So we don't need to look at this anymore. So we're going to jump over here, and then in this style tag here, we can go and we can add some more styles. All right, so let's start with that H2. So I'm going to say I want this H2 to have a color, and I'm just going to pick 9933FF. Oh, sorry. You need to make sure when you do hexadecimal, have the number sign in front. 9933FF. So it's kind of this purple color. Now, there's kind of different opinions about how to space things to make things easier to read when you're writing CSS. Some people like to add spaces on both sides of the colon. They might even like to add like a space. Usually it's like space before and after the curly brackets. I think this looks good. I usually don't add a space around the colon, but this makes it a lot easier to read if you have the spaces at least between the curly brackets. So you could do something like that. All right, so this is going to be all I'm going to do for the internal styles. I'm going to come back to it, but this is all I'm going to do for the most basic way of working with the internal styles. So I'm going to refresh. So now we have this purple text here. And then next I want to go to doing an inline style. So an inline style is great if you want to customize a particular element on the page. You don't want all of the elements on the page to have that same style. So in the opening tag of one of these, you're going to do space and then type in style as an attribute. So style attribute. And then you'll type in your code. So I could say color. So whatever property is going to go in the quotes, and then colon, and then let's just say it's going to be green. Now, this ends up being kind of interesting because if you only have a single style, you don't have to add in a semicolon to terminate it. All you have to do is put it in quotes. But if you do have multiple styles, you have to put in that semicolon, and then you can list off something else. So I could say background, color, and then I could say blue. And then again, you don't have to have that semicolon. For the sake of keeping things simple, I'm just going to put one style in here. So I'll put color, and then that's going to be set to green. Save that, refresh. So now we have over here, and I might just make this a little bit bigger so it's a little easier to see. So we've got our second paragraph is now green. This is a really great way of being able to customize a specific element. So we can say, I want all of the pages that are linked to the style sheet to look a certain way, and then you could say on this particular page I want these styles to look a certain way, this particular element. So getting just kind of more and more specific. Now this kind of goes back to one of our main focuses, and that's that we want our structure to be separate from our styles. So one of the issues that we have by putting our styles in the internal style section here is it's now part of our HTML file. And then especially with our inline styles is that it's now stuck there. Anytime you'd want to update the website, again, if it's 100 pages, you have to go in and update every single instance of that inline style that you might have, versus there is a better method, and that's going to be using classes, IDs, and descendant selectors. And let me bring back up these notes so we can reference this. So IDs, classes, and descendants. All right, so what are these? So an ID allows you to classify one particular element on a page. And let me actually underline that. Okay, so then a class allows you to create a group that all have the same properties. So both of these let you choose something, and it lets you apply a style to that thing. The ID you can only use once. The class you can have multiple instances of it on a page. And there's kind of different benefits to working with both of them. For example, I would say classes are better for styles, and then IDs are going to be better for JavaScript and forms. So things where you definitely only want to have one instance of it because you're trying to control how a very particular thing works. It used to be that people would use IDs more for applying styles, but it's actually become more common to have classes. And even if you only use something once on a page, by having it added as a class instead, it lets you kind of future-proof because you can use it multiple times. So there's the benefit of being able to do it more than once. A way that you can kind of remember these terms is you could think about how, you are all in this class together. And so you share some things in common, like having the same quizzes, the same videos you have to watch, the same assignments. So you share those traits. But otherwise, as a student, you have your student ID, and you as a student, you have a bunch of unique things, like your schedule is unique to you. And all that information is unique to you. So there's only going to be one instance of that ID versus you could have a class that applies to everyone. And then the last one is going to be a descendant. And a descendant is going to help you change styles for a particular item that is part of another one. So let's do an example for this one. So this one you could say, I want to create a style for the footer paragraph. So only paragraphs that are in the footer. And you might recall that I had a list up here where I said H1, H2, and H3. Those had commas between it, so you could list all of them. This is saying the paragraphs that are inside the footer. So you have footer space paragraph. So it's the paragraphs inside of the footer, and then you could say, I want those to have, let's say, yellow. And then only the paragraphs inside of the footer will have yellow. So that's a really great way of being able to be very specific. So you could put that in your external style sheet if all you want is those particular paragraphs, and then you don't have to bother with having inline styles. Similar thing with IDs and classes. So the way that an ID in a class works is you have to have the piece that is in your HTML and then the piece that's in your CSS. So in your HTML, you would have, let's say, some sort of tag. So let's say a paragraph, and then you say ID attribute is equal to, and that's going to be the name of your ID. And then in your CSS, you would put whatever the name of that ID is after the number sign. You say name of ID, and then you say what it is about it. Color, let's say red, for example. And then class is going to be similar. You'll have paragraph. You're going to say class attribute is equal to name of class, and it's up to you what that name is going to be. You can personalize that to what I would say, whatever makes sense. Try to choose something that's going to make sense. And then in your CSS, you put period, name of class, and then you can say color is blue. Whatever is going to make sense. And you can have multiple, like for a thing, you could have multiple things applied to it. Working with classes is going to be kind of up to you. You really want to think about where you might use similar things over and over again, and you could also combine things together. So you could actually have a paragraph and you could say, I want the class to be align left. And then you could also say, I also want it to be size 16. And then maybe you have like those as a list of different classes, and then you could say I also want the ID to be equal to, let's say that green is one of them. So you could list off a bunch of classes, you could list off an ID, you could have multiple things applied to it, and then somewhere in your CSS you would need to have a class that's called align left, and it would have those appropriate styles. And then you could have another one that is called size 16, and it would have those styles. And then you could have an ID called green, and it would have whatever styles those are. But let's say that you have a very specific combination of these things. You could also say, like, let's say this is a sidebar. Maybe instead you want to say, okay, I've got this paragraph. Actually, let's call it a div. So we have a div, and then we could say, I want the div to have a class called sidebar. And then in my class called sidebar, I could just list all the sorts of things that I would want to put in a sidebar. So it could be, I want it to align right. I want it to have this kind of size text. I want it to be this color background so it stands out. I want it to have this kind of border. And you would just list every single thing that you would want in it. And then anytime that you would want something to have that kind of sidebar look, you would just bring up this one particular class for it. So there's going to be a lot of ways of working with it. Just be careful with your naming so it makes sense. Like one example I'd like to give is, let's say you were working with room temperature. So you could write out room temperature, but it's kind of long. So maybe instead, and let me turn that into a class. So you could say room temperature, but you could also call this just temp. But temp could be confusing because it could mean, is that temporary? Is that temperature? What might that actually be? So you could do room temp, and this is using something called camel casing, which you'll see a lot with programming, where when you have kind of two words that you're putting together, you capitalize the first letter in each kind of sequential word as it goes across. So this could be something that would make more sense. You can call this unicorn. It's not going to make sense. If someone was looking at this, they wouldn't think, oh yeah, unicorn is to bring up the value of the room temperature. So just try to pick things that will make sense. And then if something you think isn't clear enough, add a comment to say, this is for the room temperature. And then that would help somebody make sense of what this is going to be used for in the future. You could have a little key that will kind of help explain that. All right, so for the sake of making it a little easier to follow and read, I'm going to put our classes and IDs on the same page, just so we have something else to put in here. But these could go anywhere, and we could copy these over when we're done. So what I'm going to do is, we don't have anything for these other paragraphs. So for this one, I'm going to add in the ID, and let's call this one, what color have we not used? Let's do like pink. Okay. And then we can do a class, and we'll do class equals, let's do orange. That'll be easier to read. Okay, so orange. And then to show you that we can do this multiple times, I'm going to also add orange to the H2. So class equals orange. So now we have two instances of that. And then I also want to show you the descendant. So let's do a footer. And in the footer, we'll have a paragraph. Just say copyright. And then in the paragraph, we don't have to put anything. So let's start here with that. So we'll do for the footer paragraph. So the descendant selector, we're going to have background color. Let's change that to black. And then I'm gonna indent this so they line up with each other. And then I'm gonna put this to yellow to make that stand out a little bit. And then we've got pink as an ID. So we need a number sign. And then I'm gonna say pink, and we'll do color, and I'll just do pink. And then we're going to have an ID, which is going to be period. And we've got orange, color. Oops, I did the wrong brackets. Okay, curly brackets, color, orange. So now if I hit save, and I'm going to minimize this just a little bit, so hopefully you can kind of see everything all at the same time. Let me save that, refresh. So now we have the H2 of this, the H2 that has the color purple is being overwritten by the orange. And it's a good idea to put your IDs and classes towards the bottoms because they are more specific and they will override them before. Usually, even if you put them out of order, because they are considered more specific as they're being processed, it will overwrite anyways, but it's just a good idea to put your IDs and classes towards the bottom. So we've got orange is overriding the H2 because it's more specific. We've got the footer paragraph has the background color of black, and then yellow, and that's actually a really good way to demonstrate what's going on with the element. So we'll talk about display and what that property means, but you'll notice this background color, it doesn't just go behind the text. It fills up the whole element all the way across the whole page, 100% of the screen. That's going to be the space that the whole element takes up. So you want to keep that in consideration when you're working with the background color. And then you'll notice too that there's not really any spacing above or to the side. And this really helps demonstrate that left alignment. If it was centered, the text would be in the center and it would still be going all the way across, or if it was right aligned, it would go over here. So these elements, they take up the whole space by default. And there's going to be ways that we can change that in the future. But for now, you don't have to worry about that. All right, and then next we have our ID, which is pink, which is going to be our first paragraph. And then we have our class again with orange, which is making this third paragraph orange. And then we still have the green that is being inherited from our external style sheet. And then otherwise, basically everything else has been, well, I guess the H1 is also coming through from the external style sheet. Otherwise, everything is being overwritten by everything else. All right, so this is gonna cover everything that I wanna go over for working with color, and also just kind of working with the general basics of the cascade of styles. And I'll try to give you some more tips as we go along every chapter and introduce more and more things. Right now, this is kind of the most that you really have to worry about. When you are setting up your homework, make sure that you add in your comment at the top of both files. And you want to make sure that you write things in this structure too, that you write your link correctly so it links to whatever your style sheet is going to be called, and you make sure that you specify what kind of item it's going to be, in this case, the style sheet. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave a comment in the discussion, or you could send me an email. And that should be everything for this video. I'm going to make, I think, one more video that really talks about content from chapter 4, and then we should be ready to move on to chapter 5's content.